Welcome to He's a Giant, a pod about all things college football and all things Giants football. I'm your host, Sal. Here with me is my co-host, Monty, and a special guest host, NYG Mason. What's up, fellas?
What's up?
What's going on, man? Combine day. It's been a good day.
Dude, what is it with Monty? He's not even wearing a anything Giants related. What the hell?
Yeah, man. I got West Virginia. I got the college.
He's got to trust the climb.
Yeah,
always trust the climb. All right, welcome to all of our guests. Thank you guys for being here again. I see some of our loyal friends in here. DKit1T. Hello to everybody. So today's episode, titled "More Cap Space Means More Free Agency Talk," an exciting title, coined by Monte Cristo.
Yeah, Sal.
Yeah, he went rogue. He didn't discuss this with me. He decided to just put out that amazing title, but I think it's going to be a cool episode. We have something a little bit different. It's broken into two parts, feeding off of what we discussed in the "How to Fix the Giants" episode a few weeks back. We're going to focus more on free agency today. Go over the kind of free agents we should target with our big organizational goals in mind. And as with any NFL organization going into free agency, the first question is always management of your cap. So we have with us our buddy NYG Mason. Mason, for those of you who don't know, is our resident cap guru. He does a great job of breaking down cap numbers and finances for the Giants and other NFL teams. He helps us all understand this stuff with a better degree of clarity. So Mason's going to help us go through the Giants cap situation and try to help us get to our organizational goals in the first part of the episode. But before we start, Mason, why don't you introduce yourself to everybody who's listening?
Hola.
There you go. You can follow him at NYG underscore?
Mason. No, it's just NYG Mason.
At NYG Mason. If you want to follow him, he's a great follow for anybody who's interested in learning about the cap. Mason is all over that stuff. He is our own internal over the caps guy. All right. So let's start. Monty, do you have any thoughts before we get going?
No, man. Let's just jump into it.
All right. So a few episodes ago, we went over the kind of free agents we would want to go into to try to set up our roster. And we want to do that with the organizational goal in mind that we're trying to hit some areas of need in free agency so we can actually get to the draft and just go BPA and hit some big targets without worrying about need, get that stress off. Because that's the ideal way of going into the draft. We had prioritized re-signing Xavier McKinney, signing a premier offensive lineman or two, and signing an edge rusher, or let's just say impact defensive player. We were targeting guys who are younger, probably in the age group of around 25, 26 years old, who would be over 4 or 5 years. So that is our goal. So Mason, I'm going to ask you first. Are those goals achievable for the Giants in this offseason?
Yeah. It'll be tight. It'll be tight.
You're going to have to help us get there. So I think you had sent some stuff over to Monty, right? There you go.
Yeah.
We're going to be sharing this, Monty. Can you just make that a little larger, please? Is that possible?
The biggest we got, yeah.
All right, that's fine. So that's
probably
our current
should have said it in two parts.
No problem. All right, Mason. Why don't you give us a little bit of a brief on what you got here in this chart you created?
So basically, I always like to look at the cap in terms of where we are, obviously, during Rule 51 during the offseason, because you have more than 53 players on the roster. You're going to obviously blow up the cap, and you never be cap compliant, right? So what the league does is basically take the top 51 contracts, and that's your salary cap for that period of time. The problem is that when you get to the regular season, you got to start making other adjustments, because guess what? Now you've got to worry about the practice squad, you've got to worry about your operating cushion, and you've got to worry about, and a couple other things, right? Your rookie cap may have moved depending on whether you made some trades or not, and that sort of thing. And there can be some other adjustments that happen later on as the offseason progresses. Grievance, whatever the case is, those numbers move. So I always like to look at the cap from a standpoint of where we are now, but always looking towards the regular season to sort of figure out how much we could really spend, right? And this is the first time in the last 2 years where we've actually been positive, in a positive situation, not only before the season started, but looking at the regular season itself. So right now, if you look at what they call effective cap space, which is basically how much money, if you want to max out your cap space after you have your 51 players taken off, how much money you can use would be about $22.8 million once you take off the rookie cap hold. And that rookie cap hold is what they estimate the actual cap space needed to sign the rookie class is. Don't confuse that with the rookie pool, which is the amount of cash needed. That's a different issue. This is the actual real cap space needed to sign the class and have them on the roster. So if you kind of walk through it, we got about $17 million of dead money. That gives us a gross cap space of the 30.6 minus the 7.8 leaves you at 22.8. That's about where we are right now in terms of space. If we were starting the season today, assuming we had 53 players on the roster, when you add 2 players to the roster, they're usually going to be bottom of the roster guys. So they're going to be minimum salary guys. So I just took a number of 750 per and estimated 1.5, right? So that gets you to your 53. You now have a little bit less gross cap space, 29. You take your rookie cap hold. Again, you take your practice squad, which is about $5 million, give or take, including 2 elevations every week. And then you've got your desired operating cushion, which is about $10 million, because you would have to make space for this stuff anyway. This is why we saw Leonard Williams and Daniel Jones get restructured in 2022. Leo got restructured, and then last year they restructured DJ to just try and skim through the season, right? I talked about this quite a bit in the spaces that I thought that they were probably going to run tight through the year and then just restructure everybody as they needed. And then obviously they traded Leo and got the additional pick. That leaves us with about, theoretically $6.3 million to spend without doing any restructures. If we add restructures and that sort of thing, then we can get into that 40, 50, 60, $70 million range potentially. And that would, some of that would include restructuring, anything above $40 million to spend on free agency would include restructuring Daniel Jones, which is pretty much a no-go. So.
All right. So, a lot of good information there. I think it's pretty key there. We're looking at, we got that rookie cap number. We got to keep, but then, those last 2 seem to really kind of have been like our summer problem the last couple of years, was trying to make enough space to get into the season, handle the practice squad, and handle the in-season money.
Yep. So basically what Mason is telling you guys here, as he broke down so nicely, is that when you include all the real costs that will be facing the Giants in the season, these are realistic numbers in terms of operating cushion, practice squad, rookie cap hold. Right now, as it stands, the Giants have $6.3 million of cap space to work with. Is that about right, Mason?
Yeah, essentially, if the season were starting today, realistically, that's where we would be, right?
All right, doesn't sound like a lot. So we have some goals that we feel are ambitious for building a roster. So, Mason, you're going to help us get to our goals. So, like I said, our organizational goals are, in big picture, there's a draft strategy which is going to involve getting a quarterback to get rid of the current dead weight on our roster after this year, but we want to free up enough space to, even if we have to push money back, to add at least 3 quality free agents, including Xavier McKinney, maybe 2 other guys to that. So Monty and I were discussing this. We're thinking that in the offensive line investment, we're probably looking at an investment in the territory of about $20 million per year, average annual value, split up however you want to split it up. And McKinney is probably looking, it sounds like, at about 15 to 16 million per year, average annual value. And then you've got, maybe if you can squeeze out an impact edge rusher, a guy like Bryce Huff, who I've seen reports as recently as being around 13 to 14 million a year. And we're willing to push some of that money back. Obviously, you can't do it without that, but can you help us free up space to make that more palatable this year, so we're minimizing some of the damage in the future? How can you help us get there?
All right, so let's kind of walk through that. Monty, do you have the Andrew Thomas?
This one's the Dexter Lawrence one.
That's Dex. Here. All right, let me pull Dex up so that way I have it in front of me.
Sounds good. Yeah, and I think as far as it goes, maybe we'll end up restructuring both, but I think personally, the way I look at it, if we were going to restructure one, I'd rather restructure Dexter Lawrence first, because, Andrew Thomas has some injury issues, and, and things like that. Not that I'm not worried about Andrew Thomas, but if I was gonna do one, I think Dexter Lawrence is the one I'd feel safer about making that move on. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
I'm okay with both, but I'm fine with the sequence that you're laying out, that you may want to start with Lawrence, who's a better bet to push the money back on right now. So how much do we save by restructuring Lawrence maximally?
We'd save about another $12 million. So we'd create $12 million in cap space with that. Now, the key part is understanding with a restructure, you're actually creating cap space because you don't have to replace that player on the roster, right?
Yeah.
So whereas when you cut a player, if you cut them, you have to replace them on the roster, and you may not be replacing a receiver with another receiver. You might be replacing that receiver with a guard, right? So at the end of the day, whoever replaces that player or whatever the case is on the roster, whatever the net difference is to the cap, that's what, how much you save or you don't save. So when people talk about just cutting players and creating cap space, it doesn't always work that way. So with a restructure in this case, you want to ideally restructure players that you're going to have on the roster for a long period of time. Guys like Dex, guys like AT, that would be the way to do it, right? Players that you expect to finish out their contracts, if you will.
All right, so let's start there, because I think you're going to have to restructure somebody to get to any of our goals. Let's start with Dex. So you create about, what did you say, about 12 million?
About 12 million. So basically what you're going to do is we're going to take his base salary in 2024. So if you're looking at the top table, right, which is $16 million, we're going to reduce that to the league minimum, which is $1.125 million. And then what we're going to do is we're restructuring that works out to $14.875 million that you can prorate over five seasons, right? And that's going to that works out to about, give or take, about $3 million a year, right? So if you look at the lower table, right, you see how the signing bonus has changed. Now, this is just because just to keep it simple without having a huge table spread out and everything. I just added it to the signing bonus, and that creates, obviously, this is already guaranteed salary, so it's instant dead money. The only difference here is that because we're moving it into signing bonus territory, that dead money now starts to get spread out over a couple of years instead of just being done this year if we didn't do anything with his contract, if that makes sense.
Yep.
So, sorry, go ahead.
No, so let's just start there. So let's restructure him maximally, and we'll do that. So that creates, you said that'll restructure about pretty much all of it.
Yep.
So we can. Yes. So you're getting about 13, what it looks like, 11.5 million, something like that, cap savings? Somewhere in that territory?
About 12.
Okay. All right. So that gets us to
18,
19 million. So now we're in a better place. I think Mark Glowinski is a guy who we're very likely to cut. He has very little value going forward. So I think we can do that. I believe
that's basically a lock.
That's a lock.
I've got a different idea with Glow. And here's why. Both Glow and Waller are, let's face it, if they get cut, they're probably not going to get much more than league minimum, right? It's at this point, Waller's pretty much toast. Maybe he gets $2 or $3 million.
I don't disagree with Waller.
I don't agree at all with Waller, but with Glowinski, yes, but not with Waller.
Yeah,
but Waller probably doesn't get re-signed, right? At this stage, the reality is that force them to take a pay cut, and if they make it through training camp, maybe keep them on the roster, whatever. Keep them as a camp body, league minimums. Just keep them there. That way you don't have to worry about necessarily replacing them. You got a camp body, and you still make your cap space, right?
So for Glowinski,
all they would do is just renegotiate the contract and make it less.
So what would be the savings on that one?
Essentially, he would be down at, what's his cap hit right now? 6.5.
7.1.
7.5. So it'd be about $6 million in savings, because league minimum for a guy like him is going to be about 1.2.
Okay. So let's just for the sake of, I mean, I know people are discussing in the chat like whether or not to keep him. Just for the sake of the math, let's just say you're doing that because I mean it's either that or you cut him outright and sign somebody else who replaces him as a warm body. So the net effect is the same financially,
Right.
right?
Exactly.
So you're creating another. What did you say about 6 million, 6.2 million?
Yeah. About 6 million.
right.
Let's call it 6.
So we're up to like now $24 million in
Yep.
in actual cap space this year with just restructuring Dex and Glowinski, maybe getting him down to league minimum, or cutting him and getting a league min player. I want to leave Waller alone for now because
Great.
we're going into this thinking that we're going to have a new quarterback, and I
Mhm.
think Darren Waller was a good player. He has injury issues, but he was a good player when he's on the field. I think for what he's making, it's not a ton for a quality player. So I think we want to kind of leave him alone. It would just create another hole in the roster.
Fair enough.
And I feel that we had a big issue about the big discussion about Darius Slayton on this. I'm kind of in the leave Slayton in for now, and see
Yep.
how things go. But I can't think of anybody else that like would make a meaningful cut at this point. I think you'd actually lose cap space or have net zero cap space effect by cutting anybody else, unless you thought of anybody else here.
No, I mean, basically, unless you got $5 million to work with, there's really not much that you're going to gain, right?
Mhm.
You're going to gain peanuts. A million here, two, maybe two there.
Yeah, you can do
on
it
a
for
couple
like a bunch of
but-
guys, but
Right.
yeah,
But they're,
not one.
but at the
All
end
right.
of the day, you still got to replace them, and your nets aren't that huge. So
So we're at 24-ish million right now, something like
Right.
that, of actual cap dollars, and that's paying for our rookie class, paying for our practice squad, paying for our cushion in season, which doesn't have to be 10 million, but that's an approximate number.
Yeah,
think
so we
that's a-
really have 34, but you want to leave 10 for.
and
Right.
then you could also restructure Bobby Okereke, which gives you another $5.5 million.
And then how much would you get for Andrew Thomas?
So we have that.
For
right here.
Andrew Thomas would be $14 million.
All right, so there's about 20 million sitting in there and two players who are long-term players for the Giants, on top
Yep.
of the 34 million that we have right now, not including the 10 million in functional cap space, right, for the year,
Right.
the cushion space. So I think at 34 million, we're not going to count the 10 million in cap space for now, Mason, because
No, that's fine.
quite frankly, we can restructure for that later if need be. If we end up spending those dollars, right? We have that money available to us in both Andrew Thomas and Bobby Okereke, or even cuts to some other guys or trades to some guys. So it seems like we're okay. So with the 34 million we have now, how do you feel about the prospects of getting some of these impact players we talked about? Do you feel we're there, or do you think we have to make any more moves?
So I'm thinking that McKinney would probably be a hit of 6 at about 16 million. So let's say that, we signed 3 guys at about $16 million APY, 60 in that range, plus or minus, $2 million, right? 3 guys coming in that range. You're looking, at $6 million a hit each. That's about $18 million for those guys on this year's books, right?
Okay.
Well,
that's-
Mason, let's go ahead and take a look at the contract you sent me, the theoretical contract for Xavier McKinney.
Let's pull that up. So Mason was nice enough to create a contract structure that he thought was realistic for McKinney, and he's sharing it with you guys on the screen here. So why don't you walk us through this, Mason? That's our starting point.
I did the same thing with Dex last year, and I was pretty damn close to Dex's deal when I did this last year. So basically what I did here was I said, okay, looked at all the safety deals, tried to, bring in some different things and some different elements from each of these deals, right? That were out there. At $17 million in total guarantees at signing, meaning this is what, even if he walked away next year, he's still making $17 million, $17 million this year. So no matter what, he's still getting paid $17 million, right? He's got $13 million in additional guarantees that would vest later on, that would be based on him being on the roster in 2025 and 2026. The average APY on this deal is about 15.7 million, right? A little bit hair under that $16 million range. Okay. And got some, per game roster bonuses that would be in there. Obviously last year he played every single game. So that's, he had a, extremely solid year as far as that goes. very healthy player. We could throw in some like salary escalators or something like that. So if he does hit certain performance incentives, he'll definitely get paid. His base salary would actually increase in later years. And that would be a way to potentially bridge this and get him into that top tier, 3 to 4 guys that he sort of sees himself as, but without committing those dollars right away, if that makes sense.
Okay. And so the total value of this contract is what again? 62?
The total value of this contract is $63 million, basically.
Over 4 years. I think that's pretty reasonable. And you have how much guaranteed in this?
17 million fully guaranteed at signing. $13 million would vest. We'd be able to get out of this deal next year if we wanted to, which is probably something that they're probably not gonna like in this structure. But the reality is that this is probably the way the numbers are going to end up looking, realistically speaking.
Okay.
So,
and the cap hit would be about 6 million this year.
Well, it'd be about 7. It'd be about 7 the way I have it put together right now. We could reduce it down to 6 fairly easily and move some money down into next year and that sort of thing. It wouldn't be too hard.
I mean, I think this is a reasonable structure. 4 years, 62 million. That would put McKinney right around top 5,
Just
5,
under
6,
it.
right under the top 5 of average annual value and total value in terms of top safety contracts. That's
Plus
in line
escalators.
with escalators. I might get him higher. That's kind of in line with what he has been talking about himself. Like, I'm a top 5 safety. It takes into account the market going up for these guys over time with the cap going up. He's 25 years old. He's getting better. His game, we were talking about this on Spaces today. He has the kind of game, 1T brought it up, where he's not all speed and athleticism. He's more instinct, intelligence, just knowledge of the game. It translates well long term. So you can predict Xavier McKinney being a high-end safety in the NFL for the next 5 to 6 years. This is a fair contract. I think this is the kind of deal you could get him to lock down to now without hitting the market. What do you think?
I'll say something I really like about this deal too. I'm looking at, the money down the line, and the way he has it set up is, we'd be paying him 7.3 this year, 13.3 next year. And then where the real money kicks in is 26, 27, where he's making about 20 million a year. And if Xavier lives up to what we think he can be, then you're not going to get out of that. You might even just extend him longer and push that money down the line. But if he isn't living up to it, whatever's happening, you're not happy with performance, there you can save 14 million by getting out on him in 2026, which is a nice little out to have.
I suspect that his team will want a little bit higher signing bonus and guaranteed money in this, probably in the territory of like total guarantees around 20 million or so, 20 to 25 million, somewhere in that territory. But I think this is a workable number here to start with. So this is reasonable. I appreciate you doing this, because that's kind of our priority internal free agent to sign. And that gets him, and hopefully the Giants are working on this right now, and they get him locked up, because that sets up the rest of free agency.
Now, mind you, I'm not big on paying this kind of money to him, just because of where I feel his value is. But I do feel that this is probably where they're going to land.
I think that's fair, and that would help them set up the rest of their offseason. So that takes $7 million off our $34 million cap, so to speak, right? Just about. So that puts us back at about $27 million. This is not including money we're going to create for a cushion, which we could always get from restructures of good players later. But that's solid. $27 million left. McKinney down, and we still have some money here to operate to add a few more impact players, which is what we're looking for. So, and keep in mind, this is keeping with if I'm not mistaken, Mason, you set this up to accommodate the rule of 51, right?
Yes.
So what that means, folks, is Mason has already accounted for essentially a full roster here, minus 2 players essentially, who would be like vet minimum type players. So he's really already accounted for most of our spending on this. So the dollars we're working with, the 34 million before this contract and the 27 million after this contract, are actual dollars that we can apply to free agents that we want to pay for. So that's a very helpful way to look at this. Did you have any other input on free agency or contract structures, Mason?
Well, guys that I think might come in. Obviously, you've got Pinnock, right? Who's obviously gonna probably get extended. I think his hit this year is about $3 million. Depending on how they structure that, we probably will not save any money on that. We'll probably lose about $1 million or maybe $1 million or $2 million in space with that. But I think that, we're probably going to be in the market for one or two top of the line free agents potentially, and then we may be looking at some day 2, day 3 guy. When I say day 2, day 3 free agents, I'm talking about tier 2, tier 3 free agents. The one guy that I really have my eye on is Jermaine. Is it? I forget. I don't know.
Illuminor.
Yeah, Illuminor, right? From the
Vegas.
Raiders, right?
Yeah, the right back Raiders.
Yeah, with Brasillo. Good swing tackle, solid. Probably. I'm guessing we're probably going to take a shot at him, right? He's probably going to be about. I'm going to guess anywhere from $5 to $10 million, right? I do think Onwenu is going to be in that conversation. Another guy that could be in there is Trent Brown. Trent Brown actually played right tackle, I believe, his rookie year, right? So, that could be somebody that comes in depending on what they want to do with Evan Neal. Couple other guys. I mean, obviously you've got Robert Hunt and Kevin Dotson becoming free agents, right? They're going to be, they're top end guards from that standpoint. You got, Kevin Zeitler obviously could be a value signing. And then you've got, I always forget how to pronounce his first name, but Vaitai from the Lions. He was injured this year. Missed like 5-6 games if I'm not mistaken. But he could be potentially a cheap signing that brings some value too. In that potentially $3 to $4 million range. I do think that if they get rid of Waller, bringing in, they may have to bring in a free agent tight end because I don't think we're going to get one in the draft, right? With everything else we have going on. So it would just depend on how they play that out. And I do believe that we're probably going to be looking at like an interior defensive lineman in addition to an edge player. And
awesome.
and a guy like drawing a blank on his name right now, cornerback from Houston. What's his name? Steve Nelson. He's played in a lot of different systems. Solid guy, solid sound player. Unspectacular, but just a sound guy. A sound player to bring in. Would probably, he's a boundary guy, so we definitely need to bring somebody in for the slot. Whether it's through the draft or free agency as well.
Awesome.
One idea I want to throw you guys before we move off of the salary cap stuff that I want to throw out there. We mentioned this last time, so I want to kind of talk about the free agency preview, and that's Darius Slayton. We've left that alone so far, right? And that's about about $6 million if we did touch, but we've left it alone so far. But theoretically, if they were interested in a wide receiver in free agency, that is something they could, kind of swap out. Like, for example, I'm not a huge fan of Gabe Davis, but if that was something they wanted to go down, they could, if they got Gabe Davis for about $8 million a year or something like that, they could easily swap that out for a Darius Slayton and, wait until something like that develops and then make that move. So, you can make a move without really having a huge change in your salary cap there.
Man, that's like buying a Honda Accord and trading in a Toyota Camry. What's the point of that?
The tricky part with that though is that he's got a roster bonus too of like $2.5 million, right? Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't necessarily hold on to him too long if they were going to go that route. I would just outright cut him and move on, right? To do that if they're trying to get the cap space. Now, makes sense. Oddly, they could, I'm a Slayton stan. I like Darius Slayton for whatever reason. They could also potentially restructure and push some money back, and it wouldn't be that much, to do. It wouldn't be that much of a hit if they had to cut him next year or whatever. But the advantage is if they decide to keep him, give him another deal, he'd be fairly cheap. Probably one of those guys that just ends up playing his career here, just ends up being a role player his entire career. But that would give us another $2.5 to $3 million to play with too.
No, that's good. No, that's good to know. All right, Mason, you are awesome. Thank you. Now,
what do you guys think about talking about that? What about Darnell Mooney?
Uh, well, so our focus has been really to target younger players
Hmm.
who are coming up on their free agency that we think will be part of the roster for the future. So you do need roster fillers, but our philosophy in going into this
Hmm.
was you're not going to, Rome wasn't built in a day. You're not going to fix
Right.
this in 1 year. You got to do it the
No,
right
of
way.
course.
The right way to me is actually signing high impact quality younger free agents, a few of them, and then just get best player available in the draft that you can get your hands on, and then roster fillers, and not put money into the older players that are not impact. I know Authentic saying Mooney's 25, 26, but yeah, I mean, I was just bringing up, but I was focusing more on the high impact part with when I mentioned Mooney. I don't think Mooney's an impact player for us at all. Personally, I think that if we're going to go down that road, you're better off just staying with Darius Slayton. I think
That's
Darius
kind of
Slayton
where I am with that.
he's a perfectly good receiver. I'm okay with getting rid of Slayton, but if I were to get rid of Slayton, I'm replacing him with honestly, I'm just letting Jalen Hyatt get his reps and drafting. Even if I have to draft 2 receivers or get a UDFA or get a vet min kind of guy to add to the roster, I'm fine with that.
Or-
Because in theory, we're drafting a receiver on the high end of the class somewhere, right? So we're filling up the starters at least that way.
And we'll talk about this more when we get into the wide receiver and stuff, but something we threw out last time is like if you made a splash with like Calvin Ridley, for example, that would be a good reason to move out from Slayton.
Right.
You're actually making an upgrade there.
Right. And I think in that situation, you're digging into that remaining where are we at? Like $28 million. 27. Yeah, you're digging into that remaining $27 million by another few million dollars realistically by going into the Ridley route. So I mean, I think that's something we would consider later, but you want a higher impact player than Slayton, I think. So
Yeah.
I'm fine with like just keeping Slayton, or if you're going to dump him, I want to dump him for somebody who's higher impact, like a Ridley, or just go with the kids. Go with the younger players, as Don is saying, play the kids. I'm fine with that. Rome wasn't built in a day.
Now, the other question is going to be running back, right? Obviously, we're probably losing Saquon and Matt Breida, right?
Are we?
So,
are we? That's a whole other issue.
That's a whole other debate. But let's assume
we are in this exercise. So yes, we
all
are.
right. So let's say they go. I've been a proponent of bringing guys like maybe like a Zach Moss, Devin Singletary, right? Let's get rid of, let's cut the weight on Brightwell. He's not going, obviously nothing's going on with him, right? Get rid of him. I think Gray's pretty much done, right? And then maybe pick up a young kid, in the draft, right? Later on, but at least give yourself some flexibility with both Zach Moss and Devin Singletary, maybe even a DeAndre Swift. You've even got the retread, what's his name? That's still a free agent, old ex-Cleveland Brown. Yeah. So it's like, there's plenty there that'll be, good value signings. So it just depends on how they want to go about it. But I think that Zach Moss would be a great addition. I think he could be had for that $4 million range. In that $4 million range, Devin Singletary is probably going to be in that 2 to 4 range, depending on where it falls in.
Obed says Zach Moss is 50. I don't think he's 50, Obed. I think he's 26. But 50,
yeah, no, he's young.
50,
He's young.
50 in running back years. I get it.
Yeah,
I see what you're saying.
But yeah, definitely some good names to think about throughout this.
Yep. All right. I think we're going to transition now. Mason, thank you so much for coming, man. We appreciate you.
Thank you, gentlemen, for having me on. I appreciate it.
You're the best, brother. And we'll probably have you back on when we have to fix this shit out of whatever Joe Shane fucks up before the beginning of the season. So
yeah, man, 100%.
All right, man. I appreciate you so much. And before you go, everybody, please follow at NYG Mason on Twitter, at NYG Mason, if you want to learn about the cap and specifically how it impacts the Giants. He is the best follow around for information like that.
Thank you, guys. You're too kind. Too kind.
Peace, Mason. Thank you.
Thank you, Mason. See ya.
All right, Monty. So Mason, really good stuff there for people who like going through the spreadsheet stuff, and he's the best at it to just kind of clear it up. So there we go. We have our Rule of 51 taken care of. We have signed back Xavier McKinney at a pretty high value, but the kind of value that gives him what he wants, keeps our best young safety in the room. We got $27 million left to work with. We do have to address running back. He's right about that in some way, shape, or form.
But we haven't touched AT. We haven't touched Okereke. We haven't touched Waller. We haven't touched Slayton.
All we've done is restructure Jax and basically something to Glowinski, and that's it.
Yeah, and look, there's other guy like Mason mentioned it. It's not going to do a lot. Like somebody mentioned Aaron Robinson in the chat. It's not going to do a lot. So like 500,000, but you do enough 500,000 moves, suddenly you're at a couple more million. So
yep, exactly. All right, so
happen.
So I know people love the stuff that Mason gave them in the chat. We appreciate you guys being here as well. So that's going to take us to the second half of this discussion. Now that Mason has given us the baseline operating capital to fix the shit out of this ridiculously bad team, let's get our expert in roster building, in free agency, in draft, a man of great intellect, onto our pod now. You guys know him by his official God-given name, his federal name, K-Sexy. So why don't we get K-Sexy in here?
What's going on, fellas?
What's up, Doctor? What's up, Doc K-Sexy? How you doing, man?
Man, it's sad, but the past few years, this has been my favorite time of the year, and I feel like that's the case for a lot of people. After about week 5, week 6, we're like, all right, we love this team, but let's move on. And so this is a really important time of year, and people have these sayings like, okay, you build the team through the draft, free agency. You fill a few holes here and there, but free agency is important. And we gotta talk about how, I don't think I've seen a Giants team with such little depth and so many holes, right? It's one of those things where you ask a question, okay, what's the biggest hole on the team? And you could pull everybody in this chat, and we have a few really big ones, but then after that, you're going to see a different answer, every time. And so, kind of a nice segue into what Mason was saying and how you guys kind of ended that last segment. I wanted to first, before we go into specific people, I wanted to talk about a few rules that I have when it comes to roster construction and roster building, because I think it's important to understand, how to really build a good roster, not just with top end players, but also with depth and free agency. A few things that I think, are going to be underrated, right? And a lot of this, unfortunately, I've looked at what some other teams and some other really good GMs have done. And I'll point out one case where Joe Schoen did something that I really appreciated last season. So I hate bringing him up, but Howie Roseman has made a killing for the Eagles. And yeah, I know we love to shit on the Eagles, and nothing made me happier than seeing them, fall on their ass. But he does some good work in terms of roster construction, right? And so the first thing is scheme matters a lot. And we talk about get the best players, but if you really are looking for success, you want to have players that can fit into what your coaches want to do. And so when we look at some of our newer coaches, right? So Shane Bowen is very, very different than Wink. And we targeted Bobby Okereke because the middle linebacker, the inside linebacker position, is such a huge part of Wink's system. And so when we look at Shane Bowen, Bobby O is too talented to not make an impact, but I don't think you're going to see the same level of impact that he had. I mean, he had an all-pro season last year. He was an all-pro, right? And so we have to think about, who is meant to succeed in the Shane Bowen system. He's not gonna blitz nearly as much. And then you look at how often he was in nickel, right? So the Giants, I think, were in nickel 5 DBs or more about 65 to 70% of the time, which is around league average. Titans were 84% of the time. Yeah. So DBs are going to be very, very important. So that's just one thing to think about, right? Another aspect of this is you want to look at market inequities when it comes to what positions are loaded and what positions aren't. And so take running back, for example, right? You want to look at and be active where there are so many good players that you don't have to pay top dollar for the top one, because every single contract after that first one is going to go lower and lower and lower, and you can maybe afford to wait. Mason talked about, Zach Moss within the running back system. I guess, Zach Moss is an example. I don't know. Some people don't like him. Some people do. But, that is an example of where you could get potentially somebody that can give you some productivity for a third of the cost of somebody at the top of the market.
Yep.
I also think that lower average money positions, I think that's where you can spend a lot of big money in free agency. When you think about, franchise tag, right, where tackles and receivers and corners are making so much money. I think if you target important positions at a lesser franchise tag value or a lesser average value, you're going to get so much more value. And one example is Bobby Okereke, which is what Joe Schoen did. Bobby Okereke was the second highest paid linebacker from last year's free agency class. And you look at, aside from Tremaine Edmonds, right? So he was at the top, right? But then you look at, again, the depth at that position. You had TJ Edwards, you had a bunch of other guys that were pretty good, right? And we got somebody on that second tier. You look at the impact that Bobby O made compared to Alan Lazard, who made $1 million more than he did, or Jacoby Myers, who made more than he did, And so if you're going to spend money for top tier players, and if you want to add the most talent, you can sometimes think about some of these lesser paid positions, and that might be, a good option. The third is maybe try and snipe players at value that were hidden by players above them that you think could be a good fit for you, or were mis-schemed, right? So a great example of that was Hassan Reddick, which again pisses me off. But the Eagles identified somebody who was such a great scheme fit, who had their value suppressed because he played in a shitty Arizona Cardinals defense who didn't know how to use him. I thought we were going to get something similar with Isaiah Simmons. Obviously, that didn't work out, but that's where you kind of can put some extra cash in. And the last is what you guys said, which is if you're going to gamble with money, gamble on youth. That's going to be really, really important. And so when we look at this team, we have a lot of issues, right? And I think, you guys alluded to maybe the two impact positions that we want to look at. Edge, of course, right? Shane Bowen doesn't want to blitz, but he is, but he wants to pressure. And Joe Schoen said it, right? So he said in his presser, right? Wink wanted run stuffers. Bowen wants to go after the passer. Kayvon, we see what he is and what he can develop into. Azeez, at this point, I'm not looking at him as more than, a DPR, designated pass rusher.
Yeah.
I don't think he has the ability to stay healthy enough to be a full-time rusher. But I think when you look at some of these pass rushers, we all want Josh Allen. He's not going to be available. We all want Brian Burns. He's not going to be available. But then you look at guys who can be better two-way players. I really don't want anything to do with Chase Young. That's just me. He might have been a little bit more productive for the 49ers, but something about him kind of rubs me the wrong way. But then you look at some of like these second line players. And one guy that kind of stood out to me that shouldn't cost too much, because what I'm looking for is starting caliber players that can add depth, right? And can add, so two players kind of came to mind for me. One is Andrew Van Ginkel, and the other is Jonathan Grenard from Houston. I think both would have a place in our system, have some of that versatility where they can play a little bit of linebacker, as well as a defensive end. Van Ginkel is maybe a little light, but I think Jonathan Grenard definitely can. And then you can take some shots on some young players that you think have a little bit left in them, like Yetur Gross-Matos or Dorrance Armstrong. He's behind a couple of Cowboys, as somebody that can come in with pretty good depth. So if you can't get the top of the line talent, there is some talent at edge. And it's something that we got to consider. And staying on the defensive line, DL is going to be important for us too. We have Dexter Lawrence and then Jordan Riley and DJ Davidson. I would love to keep A'Shawn Robinson. I don't know if the Giants will be looking for more of a traditional 3 technique like the Tennessee Titans had with Justin Simmons. And so I don't know. What are your guys' thoughts on how we should construct this defensive line with some of these players? A guy, and we're not talking about the draft, but like I was just talking to Monty before this, I love Darius Robinson, somebody that has inside-outside versatility for us. But something like that, I think we could be in the market for more of a traditional 3 technique as opposed to some of these God-forsaken hog mollies that I didn't think I'd have to use that today.
Well, I think Shane Bowen, if you listen to what he has said and what was said by Art Stapleton, wants not just guys who can rush the passer, but he also wants guys who can rush the passer in early downs. And I think that's a big distinction from Wink Martindale. He's labeled as having a 3-4 defense, but Authentic did a good job of breaking this down for us. It's not really a 3-4. I mean, the majority of the reps look more like 4 down linemen and a big, kind of like the Perry Field big nickel, right? Four down linemen, 2 inside linebackers, and then you've got nickel behind it. So I think that basically we're going to need. We have Dex, we have Kayvon. We're going to probably need to add at least, I would say, 2 impact linemen, whether you want to call them interior defensive linemen, edge defender, one of each, whatever. But guys who can actually get at the passer. I agree. You need 3 techs who are 1 gappers, and you need maybe a power edge, or if you want to get another true edge that's a speed guy, that's fine. But I think we need to add 2 of them this offseason, at least. And we want to go young. We want to go for guys who are going to be here. So I'm thinking at least 1 in the draft. So what we had talked about in our previous episode was signing an impact edge defender, or if you want to make it interior D-line, that's fine. But signing 1 of them in the free agency class, 1 impact guy. Yeah. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if there is a position to focus on, it's that. Just because we need that much help, and I think that's what's gonna make this defense go. So if you're looking at a big time interior defensive lineman, Justin Madubuike from the Baltimore Ravens would fit so well with what we'd want to do. If Josh Allen and Brian Burns are out, you could make a play, like you said, for Bryce Huff. He is a little bit of a gamble just because of how little he's played in terms of snaps, but he is definitely somebody that I could see the Giants giving big money to, and really helping out Kayvon on the other side by adding, by stressing the pocket from the other side. That's part of it, right? These edge rushers have to work in tandem, push the quarterback to somebody else, and everybody eats, right? So we saw that a little bit, flashes with Azeez, especially the Seattle game this past year, but not nearly with enough consistency. So that's certainly something.
I'll say to your point, when you were laying out what you look for in free agency, though Bryce Huff may be a little bit risky, he kind of fits into that category where you take a guy who's been kind of underutilized because, he has a lot of guys in front of him there. He hasn't gotten the snaps that these other guys have gotten. So, you take a gamble that guy comes in, gets a full-time role, and he blows up. That's what you're hoping when you sign a guy like Bryce.
100%. And you also have to look at your team, and you have to see who is waiting in the wings, like the kids, right? And do we have any other kids on the defensive line? We do at interior defensive line. we have nobody on the edge.
Yeah,
Nobody.
Right.
You know, the
And,
cupboard
and,
is bare.
and the strong and the strength, and I know you know this, and for those, just as a teaser for those of our people, our listeners here, KSI is going to be coming back to join us to talk a little bit more about our draft stuff a little bit later in prospects. But as you know, dude, the interior D-line class is very strong in this class, whereas the edge room is a little top heavy and then it kind of tapers off. So it seems like the reverse is true when you look at the free agency class. I don't know how you feel about
Yeah.
it, but this is the free agency class that reflects that powerful defensive class of 2019 for the most part, right? Those are the guys who are hitting the market now. So I think I'm kind of in the camp of let's get a young pass rusher from the edge in this free agency group. Get one of them. We mentioned Huff because I just like I like what he offers. He's young. He's 25. He was 20. I think his pass rush win rate was insane. It was like 20%. He was top tier as a pass rusher. Has a lot to offer. I mean, has a lot to develop as a run stopper, but it's a guy who might be working with Andre Patterson. You hope that there's some cross work with him, things like that. So what are your thoughts on him? And I like the idea of Grenard if he actually gets out of if they let him out of Houston. Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing, right? If you have a good young pass rusher, what are the chances teams are going to actually let him go? That's the other thing, and that's what's so frustrating about this, right? I love Bryce Huff. I think that when I look at edge rushers, right? I look at first step and I look at explosion. That's going to be the most important thing. Bend is important, speed to power is important, but you want explosiveness. And he's a young guy, and when you mentioned Andre Patterson, right? If there's anybody that's going to be there to develop, a pass rusher. And what I'm also interested in seeing is Andre, they're going to say it's a 3-4, right? They're going to say it's a 3-4. They're going to classify these edges as linebackers. Are these players going to be in Andre Patterson's room or our linebacker coach's room? And that's gonna I have no earthly idea. But
we asked that question when they hired Shane Bowen. I forgot who we were discussing this with, but
Justin Pennick.
Yeah, it was Justin Pennick. That and we had heard obviously that nobody in Wing system, none of the edge rushers spent any time at all working with.
It was all Wilkins.
With Andrew Patterson. It was all Wilkins. It just I understand it, but I don't understand it. You have an asset like Andre Patterson just sitting there, and you have guys who spend half their time with hand in the dirt, lined up to rush the passer. Yeah. Why wouldn't you use him? So I'm hoping that was part of the interview process with Bowen. That hey, are you we want to keep these coaches. Remember that we want to keep our assistants. That was a big part of hiring him. I hope that means you use a guy like Patterson to develop Kayvon Thibodeau, 100%. To develop any other edge rusher we bring in. So absolutely, I love Huff. I saw a report. I don't know if it's real or not, man, but I don't know if you saw it, that Huff is apparently his agents are hearing that he may not get what he thinks he's going to get on the market.
Well, I think it's because of that lack of productivity against the run. I think that will suppress his value. But I mean, who knows? And another name to potentially think about as sort of a cheaper version of Huff is Joshua Uche. If you're looking for somebody like that, I think that if the Giants decide that they want to, have more of a pure pass rusher and are kind of tired of Azeez, he's somebody that, we can probably get for a couple million per year less than what Huff is going to command. And he's got some juice too. He really does.
So PFF has them listed as very different. So in terms of perceived value, so they have Huff making about $16 million per year over a 3-year deal, and they have Uche at $7 million per year.
Yeah, he's gonna be discounted. And again, that's because when you look at this edge class, right, you drop down considerably. Now, something that I actually had a question for Mason, but I didn't really bring it up with him when he was here. Is with this increase in the salary cap, is that I don't necessarily think it's going to impact, it's not going to inflate the values of the top end guys as much, because once they hit, okay, this is the new high, that's what it is. Like they're going to just go based off of last year. But I do feel like it's going to inflate some of these mid-tier guys a little bit and might make them a little bit more expensive than we think. I'm not sure how that's going to affect some of these second tier guys, but But
Yeah, I mean, Mason, you're in the chat. If you have anything on that, add it. I know we talked about this with Mason previously in a space about the first part. I'm not sure what he feels about the middle part, but he did say that he doesn't think it's going to affect, these top
yeah,
guys and stuff like that because, yeah, it's comparisons to previous contracts, and that's what they always. It's not necessarily based off the percentage; it's based off what the last guy made. So
so I wanted to kind of move on to the secondary for a little bit.
Please go for it.
If there's thank you, Mason. That's great to
So
hear.
yes. So for
So
anybody who's listening, he said had the discussion with a few people. They feel the increased cap will change.
Will
Will
not
change a. Will,
will not change.
don't feel the increased cap will change AAVs drastically. Don't.
so if there's if I was a gambling man, and maybe I am a little bit, if there was one player, one free agent that I think will sign with the Giants, it's Sean Murphy Bunting. Uh, he played for Tennessee, and the nickel position is so important for the Shane Bowen defense. We talked about a little bit with how often at least 5 DBs are on the field, but sometimes that's going to be safety, sometimes it's going to be a corner. I think Murphy Bunting, from his time in Tampa and then Tennessee, I think can do a little bit of both, and he's one of those players that you look at and say, okay, he's not anything. He's not Brian Branch, which, oh my God, he would have been killing it if we had drafted him with this defense.
He got
But
so close to us. He got
I
so close to us. He was
it
falling, and I
still
was like,
it still hurts. It still
yeah,
hurts.
I know.
But I think uh, Bunting has some inside outside versatility, and we have Deontay Banks, and do we really trust in Cordell Flott? Is Adoree really going to be back? Didn't really look like it, right? So we have next to nothing at cornerback. Does Aaron Robinson still exist? I have no idea.
No, he's football dead. That's a term
Uh,
we use. No offense. Go ahead. Oh, I'm sorry, Jabri. that is credit Jabri. Football dead. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Continue.
but and I think that's why they are going to prioritize Xavier McKinney, because he has some of that similar inside versatility, as well as nickel versatility, as well as the just pure one high safety position. But that is somebody that I think could be really in the cards for us, and I don't think he's going to be that expensive. I think we can get him for reasonable, I don't know, 7 to 8 million a year.
Yeah.
Other players, Christian Fulton, obvious connection with the Tennessee Titans. I don't think that we're going to be big players in the Jalen Johnson sweepstakes.
I don't think
Or
there will be a
anything like
Jalen
that.
Johnson sweepstakes.
No,
I think he's going to get tagged.
he's going to get tagged, more than likely. There's a couple of older players that I think might be scheme fits for us. Akella Witherspoon, I think, might be. Witherspoon's 29, going to be 29, so he's not that off. Rock Ya-Sin, who's kind of bounced around the league, but these are more replacement level guys. But we need warm bodies and good warm bodies if we want to take a flyer on somebody like CJ Henderson, who's also bounced around the league. Something else that we can do. And then on the other side is offensive line, right? And a lot of it's going to come down to, and we're going to really see how the Giants feel about Evan Neal with what they do. Because if we're talking about drafting a quarterback and seeing the abomination that was our offensive line this year, right? You're not going to trust Josh Azudu coming back from a season-ending injury, and we'll see how they feel about Evan Neal, whether he can make that jump to tackle or not. Obviously, everybody's talking about Michael Onwenu. I have nothing to say about him except he's going to be expensive, and he's going to be a perfect fit for us.
Yep.
Yeah.
He has tackle versatility. I mean, I probably wouldn't want to play him there but if we don't like what Evan Neal's putting down, we could see him there. I mean, he's going to get paid, mid to high tackle money, I think. And so then the question is, hey, are we going to be able to pay for a good edge and somebody like Onwenu? Probably not. And that goes back to what, we're saying about we're not going to be able to fix this thing in one offseason. So when you look down the list at some potential starting potential, right? I think, by the way, besides Onwenu, I think Kevin Dotson is probably the best fit in terms of just pure scheme fit. So Brasillo in Oakland and with the Patriots ran much more of a gap heavy scheme. And then the last year or two, he moved to more of a mix, a gap and zone. And I think that was partially due to Josh Jacobs being more comfortable in zone. When you look at Saquon, I don't know if Saquon's going to be, I'm not saying anything about Saquon and if he's going to be here or not, but he was probably, at his best, first couple years when we had Kevin Zeitler. Will Hernandez blew in pass pro, but you get him out, in a as a puller or, out in space, he was halfway decent. And so, if we move back to a heavier sort of gap scheme, Kevin Dotson is amazing. He's going to cost, he's going to cost almost as much as Michael Onwenu, but he's somebody else that we could potentially consider. Robert Hunt played really, really in a really heavy zone scheme. Miami runs just a pure zone scheme, and they run that to perfection. But I think Robert Hunt, when I was looking at him in the draft, I thought he'd be a perfect fit for a gap scheme too. And so he's somebody maybe in that second tier that we can look at, if we do decide to go crazy on edge. I saw somebody in the chat mention Damian Lewis, who I also think is a really good fit. The Seahawks run a zone scheme. They drafted Abe Lucas and Charles Cross to be in a zone scheme. And I thought coming out of LSU, Lewis was pure gap player as well. And so I think he was one of those things, when we talk about roster construction and who to target, I thought he was a bit miscast. And so I think he would be a potential starter option for us. Somebody mentioned Nick Allegretti. I think also kind of in that mid-tier sort of, he's under 30. He's somebody that I think could be a spot starter for us as well. So there are options in the guard market that aren't just at the top. And, depending on how we decide to allocate resources, I think that we can get a starting guard and an edge in this free agency class. And then it's pretty much vet min players after that. But I think
that's okay.
But I think we can shore up those two spots for sure.
And I'll say, you mentioned Robert Hunt, and maybe there is a thought, like you said, like coming out, felt he's better at gap, but you're also projecting a little bit because he's been more in a heavy zone.
Yeah.
I will say, I think you mentioned second. I think he'll be just as expensive as the first two guys you mentioned. I think he'll be right up there with the Onwenu and Dotson. And I'll say, but the one positive about Robert Hunt played right tackle his rookie year. He played pure right tackle his rookie year. So you do have that versatility when you're bringing, like you said, I mean, even more so than Onwenu, you would prefer not to do that, but you have the option. You're not going to let Neal, take down your season if you bring in a guy.
Couple other guys that have that tackle experience, but could potentially play a guard. Isaiah Wynn, although he's got a lot of injury issues, so he's going to be more of a lower tier player. Connor Williams, who was a badass before he got injured. I don't know. I feel like he's more of a zone scheme fit, but I thought he did really, really well for Miami when he was available. And then who was that last guy that I was looking at?
Urza Cleveland has some versatility.
Ezra Cleveland, Cody Ford, although
Cody Ford.
he's
Action.
more of a pure guard, but he's somebody that Joe Shane and Brian Dable have some familiarity with. So there are options in the guard market. And then I wanted to also talk a little bit about safety because Xavier McKinney, obviously we would love to have him back, but I do also just want to point out that this is a pretty decent safety market. And if we get priced out with Xavier McKinney, and if you go by his Twitter, it looks like we might be priced out of Xavier McKinney. There are some, low key, really, really great options. Geno Stone is coming off an insane year, right? I think he led the league in interceptions. He's an option. Then you look at Cam Curl, who I think Washington's going to really try hard to retain. He's going to get some big money. But then you go down a little bit. And two players really kind of stick out that I think are starter quality and I think would thrive here. And I didn't even mention Antoine Winfield Jr. He's going to get the bag, so that's why I didn't even mention it. But
he's going to get the tag.
He's going to get the tag and then maybe the bag. Yeah. But Jeremy Chin, I think, has been flying under the radar, and I think he would be a great fit. Three guys, actually. The versatility. Monty's guy, Kyle Duggar, who I think would be an incredible fit here. And then my guy that I really, really liked and still really like, Julian Blackmon in Indianapolis. He was Rookie of the Year. And he actually is coming off his best year with the Indianapolis Colts. He would be our best safety if McKinney weren't here. And I think a pairing of him and Jason Pinnock wouldn't be that much worse, to be honest with you. And I think when you look at Winfield, Curl, McKinney, all of these guys, even maybe Geno Stone, I think he's in that second tier, and I think he's not going to get paid nearly as much. And so if we are looking to save some cash, that is an option too. Mason said Jordan Whitehead. That's a pretty decent option as well if we want to pair him back up with Jason Pinnock, get all the Jets sloppy seconds. But he's somebody I feel like we can give Dane Belton a chance over him maybe, but we have options in a lot of these spots.
What do you feel about former first-round pick Darnell Savage?
I like him. How old is he?
26 and a half.
Yeah.
26. To be honest with you, I thought he was like 30. but I guess because he's been in the league for a while. So Savage is more of your pure free safety, but he can play. He played a decent amount. He was in the Packers, right?
Yep.
He played a decent amount in the nickel for them. I haven't watched him too much, but he's certainly somebody that I would consider. But there are a lot of good options at safety if McKinney is not back. And
a position. Sorry, I was at a position too. You talked about with look, the top of the market gets paid.
Yeah.
You can mention Tremaine Edmonds, that linebacker, but you can get that really, really good safety players for not that much money.
And that's the thing. If you can build quality and quantity and build out depth, right? In a lot of these places, right? If Deonte Banks goes down, we're fucked. If McKinney went down last year, he played 100%. He played 100% of snaps, right? If Bobby Okereke went down, so we really have to build up depth. These are, and so getting some of these mid-tier and lower-tier guys is going to be really, really important. You want to talk about maybe another under-the-radar pass rusher / linebacker that we can add in, Zach Bond from New Orleans, another guy that comes to mind. And so if we can fit some of these, vetmin or close to vetmin players that can push for playing time, and I feel like, again, in a lot of these cases, vet min players are going to be pushing for playing time. Especially at guard and especially with some of the defensive positions. I think we can round out this roster. I'm not going to say complete, but more complete than where we're at. And I think we should take full advantage of the fact that Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence are in their young 20s, have already gotten paid a lot. And if all goes well and we have a new quarterback, we're shedding 30-40 million in cap space in 2025. Bring up some of these guys and backload a little bit. You can afford to do so. But all of these guys have to be young. All of these guys have to be young. We have to grow together as a team. We're not competing anytime soon. We have to grow with these players. They have, and they're young vets. So you hope that, and you want character, right? That's the last thing. You don't want a Mecole Hardman on your team because, there are certain NFL rosters that have built a culture of winning that can handle, some of these assholes. But we are not one of them right now. We're building towards it, but we're not one of them right now.
So I think we agree. That was awesome, by the way. Thank you for going through all those guys because you went through a lot of the needs we have and focused on like the younger guys for the most part. You skipped over a lot of the guys who are in their 30s who are not part of the future, depending on the positions. So, and that's the way we're looking at it. It's like I think we share the same philosophy. Free agency is not a filler. It's not like throwaway. Hey, just fill up the roster with nonsense. It's actually a place to build. I mean, there are two ways to build an NFL roster. There's the money you have via cap space and cash that your owners give you, and then there's draft picks, and they're relatively equal in their value to the team. So people, I think, underestimate the value of free agency. Not every free agency class is good. This class, I think, is excellent in terms of high quality young free agents. And I really feel like we should be in a position to add 3-4 guys maybe who are high impact young players at key positions, and if we can add them. They don't have to be top of the market, but maybe, like you said, like near top of the market, second tier, guys who can grow with this team. When we did the previous episode, like how to fix the team a few weeks ago, it took immense pressure off us during the mock draft section of it, right? We had our tackle guard. Yeah, as it should. Like you're not thinking about it. And then all we were thinking is, let's just make sure we get our quarterback, and then from there, just take the best player. Just take the best player we can find round after round after round after round and see how the roster looks. And I think the team looks very differently. So with that in mind, Mason gave us we did sign McKinney. I think you heard that portion of the show. And I think the contract Mason gave us is a reasonable one for what McKinney will likely get. Sounds like McKinney, I don't know. It sounds like he does want to stay. Did you hear him with Pat Leonard the other day?
Yeah, I mean, yes, although, I feel like that was very rehearsed and probably agent driven. I don't think he wants to suppress his value by acting like a dick. Although he's made it very, very clear that he wants what he thinks he's worth. We did hear, there's some rumors out there that say that we might place the transition tag on McKinney, and I think that would actually be a fantastic move. For those who don't know, the transition tag is not the franchise tag. The transition tag is it's tagging a player, but what it allows the Giants to do is it basically, and the player to do is they can negotiate with any team for a contract, and it allows the Giants first right of refusal, and it allows them to basically have teams negotiate on their behalf, and the Giants can choose to match that or let him go. And so for players where, and I'm actually kind of surprised that this is not used more, because I don't think the franchise tag for McKinney is worth it. Who's paying 2 first-round picks for safety? Nobody. And that's the advantage that we have for a franchise tag. But it allows the player to see what their value is on the open market, and that allows the Giants. It takes a lot of stress off the Giants' hands and they can see adequately what his market price is, unless they think they can convince him to take a below market deal, which doesn't sound like that's going to be the case.
I think the only value to the franchise tag to McKinney is to control the asset. If you
Yeah.
are confident that he's going to go elsewhere and you can work out a trade with somebody, I think you're just not letting him go for nothing. And you're planning on spending money. So theoretically, you may not get anything out of the comp formula.
Yeah.
And I think that's the one value of it. So it's sort of a placeholder. I like the transition tag in theory. It's just never done. I think, it's
Yeah.
rare. It's like a handful of guys have gotten. I think
Very
J.K.
strange.
Dobbins.
It's very rare.
Yeah. And I think, well, you don't get a comp pick if I'm not mistaken, right? If somebody gives a player a contract on the transition tag and you don't match it, you now no longer qualify for the compensation formula.
Right.
And so there's a little risk involved. There's also the risk of and there's the risk of just pissing off the player, right? Because teams don't want to do your work for you. They don't want to walk in and write the contract for you to just sign it. And so basically you're knocking out the market, indirectly for the player. I like the idea in theory. I think there's a reason teams don't use it, but I actually would be comfortable slapping the non-exclusive tag on McKinney if
Definitely
I felt. Yeah, I mean, I think in this exercise we're not even entertaining the idea of paying Barkley. That's going to offend people, but I mean, I can't think of a rational explanation for paying Saquon Barkley in the situation the Giants roster is in currently.
The only reason I can think of, and this is, I didn't think of it. Shout out to Dan Schneider and Nick Filato over at Big Blue Banter. They mentioned it, and this would be the only reason. The only reason to pay Barkley is if you can get him on a shorter deal, like a 2-year deal, a 3-year deal that's actually a 2-year deal, that allows him to help guide and help grow whatever new quarterback you have that you're playing. He's gotten so much better from a pass protection standpoint. You look at what the other running backs did in pass pro, and it was like Eric Gray. Oh my God. And having him as somebody who the team trusts being in the backfield, somebody that knows the scheme extremely well. We lost Monty. He got so pissed off that, there he's back. At the thought of me entertaining this, he left for a bit. But that is the only reason. If we have him on a short-term deal, because we know Daniel Jones's contract's going to be coming off in 2025, and so we can handle a little bit of a cap hit in 2025. But that's the only reason.
And the downside of a 2-year deal like that is that you're not able to push that money around. You're just eating it on your cap, and it's actually hindering your ability to add talent now that's long term. So I know that argument. I heard Dan and Nick make it, and I hear a lot of people make it. And here's what I would say: I'd rather spend that $9 or $10 million a year on a guard to protect the young quarterback, or on some other player on defense to help build the team for the future. That will help the team be better for the young quarterback.
Not a good reason.
Oh, I know. I'm just explaining my rebuttal.
I agree with you.
Agree with. Yeah,
we're in lockstep.
But you know what? We can't discount that it might actually happen. Like there is this dysfunctional relationship between the Giants and Saquon Barkley, where they somehow always find a way to make it work. Yeah. And until it doesn't work, you have to assume it probably will work. The whole Josina Anderson tweet that went out today, I don't know how real that is, but it's just, it makes no sense.
It said either they're going to sign him or they won't. That's really what it said. Yeah.
She said they would memorialize him, which sounds like I put out like a reply that he would be, they would freeze him in carbonite, like Han Solo. I don't know what memorialize means other than to do that, but we'll see. I mean, we'll see how it goes. But I mean, we're in this exercise. I think we're trying to approach this from like a long-term team building. So he's not getting paid. We're just kind of shaking his hand and say thank you for your time as a Giant. We'll see you in a few years. When your career's over, you come back, you sign that 1-day contract. You retire a Giant and do whatever you got to do after that. So Mason gave us $27 million to work with post signing McKinney. Yeah, in that exercise. So tell me how you would use that 27. You went through a lot of players. Tell me how you have $27 million to work with right now. You went through all the awesome ways you would try to build this team. What are you going to do? DK says I'm heartless. You're damn right. I'm heartless.
So Bryce Huff. would be the crown jewel of our free agency. I'd probably sign him to something like 16, 17 a year. Backload. You have to backload. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you're not going to get anything done, right?
We're ripping like another 7 off the first year, right off this first year's cap. We're using like
Yeah.
similar logic to what we had with Xavier McKinney in that neighborhood. So brings you down to
Yeah.
like 20 with that.
I think signing a guy like Damian Lewis, and re-signing Ben Bredesen for depth, not as starter for chat. That's not as a starter, as depth. I think, and then trying to develop Evan Neal as best you can, and potentially looking at, if we don't trade up, if we keep one of our second round, both of our second round picks, I'd also look at somebody like a Graham Barton or somebody like that in round 2. Again, have a little bit of Lewis is a guard only. I'm banking on Evan Neal being somewhat competent, but that's somebody that I would spend a little bit of money on. Sean Murphy Bunting for 8 million a year. I don't know if that's reasonable.
I think he's coming cheaper in that.
Yeah, he'll probably come in around like the 4 or 5 million range, I think.
Yeah, we've got X. We have to sign a quarterback. Who knows? Who knows when who knows? Yeah, who knows when Daniel Jones is going to be back, right?
No, I'm serious. Do we have to sign a quarterback? And I'm saying this I'm saying this seriously. We just heard Joe Shane say that Daniel Jones is throwing from a stationary position. He expects him to be ready by training camp. He expects him to be the starter. So let's just take Joe Shane at his word for a second. You've got Tommy DeVito. Say what you want. You got Tommy DeVito on the roster. If nothing else, you have a little bit of fun with it. He can't hurt us anymore, right? He already cost us our quarterback, so our top 2 pick. But like, you have DeVito, you have Jones. Do you really need to invest money into another veteran when you're hopefully going to get a quarterback in the draft?
It's tough, right? It's tough. It's one of those things where I don't trust Daniel Jones on a football field right now. I really do not.
I never have, but
just from a health standpoint, right? And people have setbacks all the time. I guess if we're taking Joe Shane at his word, even though I think that's just a flat out lie. I think that you have to have, and I also think from a mentorship perspective, there's something to be said there as well. I don't know if that's going to be Tyrod. I don't know if Tyrod wants to come back, but I think just from a mentorship standpoint, it would be useful. I don't necessarily think that somebody like Daniel Jones, who's being paid $40 million, is expected to be the initial starter and is directly competing against you, would be a great mentor. No matter what they say. I just don't think that that's really a case. So that would be the big argument that I would make. If Daniel Jones is not ready for the season, you could look at somebody like Sam Darnold, or obviously not ideal, right? You hope they never play, but like Sam Darnold, Drew Lock, somebody like that, as a very cheap alternative to somebody like Tyrod Taylor or Snoop Huntley. But yeah, I mean, if DJ is ready to go, then I wouldn't be opposed to holding off on signing a quarterback. Although Joe Shane did say that they were going to maybe sign a quarterback, or at least they're going to add a quarterback. We'll see.
Yeah.
And then finally, I really want to address defensive line. Is that going to be a Sean Robinson? Is that going to be somebody else? Like Marlon Davidson would be a potential option. He's more of a role player for Tennessee, but somebody that we could certainly look into. Javon Kinlaw, for somebody that we're looking for more of an early down pass rusher who's kind of been buried behind, that stacked 49ers front, as somebody. Solomon Thomas, a little bit older, but he played with the Jets, and he was a very good rotational piece for them. That's somebody that we could rotate in there too, as more of a one gapper because Jordan Riley and DJ Davidson are two gappers, and Dex is a two gapper that also destroys one gaps when he wants to. So so that's somebody else that I would look into, and then depth beyond that, I don't necessarily. I think we have adequate depth at wide receiver. And notice I didn't mention a single wide receiver. I'm not really interested in signing a wide receiver. We have so many young options that have upside, wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 upside, that what's the point? Unless, we're trading for like a Brandon Ayuk or somebody like that.
What about running back?
Running back, I mean, it's going to be running back by committee. It'll depend on how we feel about Eric Gray, and if he can compete with and improve his pass protection. That's going to be the big thing, right? But you look at guys like Zach Moss, Joshua Kelly, players like that. They are going to be very, very cheap. They're going to be super cheap. Zach Moss may cost a little bit, but Devin Singletary, like all these guys are not going to be expensive. When you look at teams are hemming and hawing at paying $10 million a year to the best running backs in the league, right? Miles Sanders got $6 million. These guys are not Miles Sanders. They're not even Miles Sanders. So you can get one or two of them and for the same price as a Miles Sanders, and have a running back by committee that is functional, and is full of vets. So I think that's something that we that we can potentially do and fit under the cap. And if you want to look at maybe some bottom tier pass rushers, if you want to give Marcus Davenport his 15th chance, a guy like DJ Wanham as depth, things like that. Zach Bond, like I mentioned before, guys that have a little bit of pass rush upside. You can.
We apparently were interested in Marcus Davenport last offseason, according to Garofalo.
Yeah, I don't know what he's done to deserve the contracts that he's gotten, but it's kind of like the initial. It's like Jadeveon Clowney almost, like the Saints traded. If you remember, Saints traded 2 first-round picks for Marcus Davenport.
I thought they were getting Lamar and took Davenport.
Yeah, and so I think he'll be fairly cheap, but it's guys like that, guys that are bouncing around the league a lot. Yannick Ngakoue is always a guy that's talked about as somebody as a DPR that you can add in, and then if you wanted to add like another boundary corner, like Rock Ya-Sin, I loved Rock Ya-Sin
fan too.
In college, and he's a pure boundary corner in a man heavy scheme, something that we can use. So again, we need depth everywhere. And I would also reconsider signing Isaiah Simmons. He had a great role as that. We could use him more as a pass rusher as well. Jay Ferry says Eli Apple. Absolutely not. No.
Yeah, no.
No.
Last guy on the list. I'll put myself out there.
But that's where I think we're at. I think we're gonna sign a lot of mid to lower tier players this year. I think we're gonna be pretty active. Maybe Ferries asked, what are we gonna give Simmons? A deal that's commensurate to his playing time. Probably. Yeah, exactly. Maybe $3-4 million 1 year, $3 to $4 million deal.
Exactly. I wouldn't go above that. I think you put like a line in the sand and say, we want to keep you here. Here's a few $1 million.
Yeah.
You're on the field for what? 40% of the defensive snaps, something like that. That's useful. If he wants more than that, God bless, good luck, and move on. And that's that. You draft someone. I guess I understand where your perspective is in terms of the mid to lower tier guys that they might do. I guess we just have a slightly different. I personally have a very a different view on this. Like I I'm not interested in signing these guys that are
Yeah.
like mid to lower tier. I really am not. I'd rather spend on like the 3 impact guys, and the 3 young impact players, and I'm fine going like vet min the rest of the way on the rest of the guys.
Yeah.
I really am, because I don't look prospectively at 2024 as a season in which we're realistically competing for Super Bowl. I think if things are done correctly, we've got a young quarterback, a real talent, not like a day 2, day 3 filler, like a real first round talent in the building. Whether he starts right away, which I think is unlikely, or more likely midway through the season or at the end of the season, it's a building season, right? It's build up your roster, get things ready for the following year, clean up some of the cap problems, but add talent as you go along. So I'm fine with just adding 2 or 3 impact guys. I think the cap is in a relatively healthy place when you look at it to do that in a strong free agency class without having to go down the road of like the mid-tier guys. So what do you think about that?
I think so. I mean, we in this scenario, right? We have 2 already. You have to consider McKinney as somebody that counts, because he's gonna, with what Mason gave, that's 16 million a year, 17 million for Bryce Huff. I guess if you wanted to, you could push for a higher tier guard. Instead of Damian Lewis, can go something like, I guess Onwenu, right? Yeah. And Onwenu is going to be making 16, 17 million a year.
Right around there. We had a count. So we kind of thought about it this way. I think Monty and I were talking about this on our usual daily our daily call during my drive back from the office about this stuff. Allocating about 20 million per year average annual value to the offensive line in this offseason. Sounds like a lot, but it's really not a lot.
It's one player and depth.
Exactly. Yep. So one high quality, high impact player and depth. So I'm thinking a guy like Onwenu plus either a depth guard or a swing tackle, something along those lines. So let's say you use 20 million to work with. How would you distribute it? I mean, I realize that we're going to move the money around in the cap and push back, but just for the sake of the exercise, give me either 1 guy or 2 guys you would distribute that money over that you think are high impact for the Giants on the offensive line.
Onwenu would be, probably when it comes to just a single player, right, that I would want in free agency, he's number 1. I think edge is probably the most important position to add to, just because of the lack of any upside at depth aside from Kayvon. But when we talk about the player that I covet the most, it would be Onwenu. Just he knows Brasillo. He is such a beautiful fit, and he can take over at tackle if we need to. I would bring back Ben Bredeson. I think that he is a serviceable player, which is what you want for depth. And then I think that you need a guy like Jermaine. Oh God, Illuminor. Yeah. Again, familiar with the system, is older, can come relatively cheaply and can play tackle if needed. And obviously Evan Neal and Andrew Thomas are not beacons of health, right? So swing tackle is going to get a lot. And then somebody like Matthew Hennessy, somebody from, he's a free agent from Atlanta. I know we just spent a 2nd round pick on a center, but I think that having a gap scheme trained, and Atlanta does a really good job of developing their offensive linemen. They don't have a quarterback and they don't know how to use their weapons, but they know how to develop their offensive line. And I think that having somebody like that to help mentor the interior offensive line would be also extremely important, because you need player mentors.
North Jersey.
I'm sorry?
He's from North Jersey too. He grew up, I think it was a Jets fan, but still.
I'm not interested in Justin Pugh. I'm not interested, that was one of those things where he came in and acted like the savior, and he was just as bad as everybody else.
Worse than Glowinski.
Yeah. Worse than Glowinski. And what are we doing with Glowinski again? Is he going to be on the roster?
I mean,
we're
I think
cut.
you're either. I mean, Mason said leave him as like
Yeah.
give him a pay cut, but I mean, realistically, I don't think he's on the team. I think you're just cutting him and replacing him
Yeah.
with another body, essentially.
How do we feel about Matt Parrott? He's a free agent.
I'm done with the Matt Parrott personally.
Yeah, I am too. I know he's going to get Vittman somewhere, just because he's a tackle. He'll get a job, I imagine, somewhere.
Yeah.
But
I'll
I don't
say,
want him.
I'll say a name you brought up earlier that it was a guy I was interested in last year, but another guy who has, a connection to Carmen Brasillo is Isaiah Wynn. You mentioned he obviously had some
Mhm.
injury issues, but he has some guard tackle versatility. He was a left tackle when Carmen Brasillo was in New England. He took I think like $2.5 million, like on a 1 year from Miami, and he played guard and center there. He'd be a good cheaper option to bring in who, can give you some versatility.
Yeah. And then add in Zudu whenever he decides to come back. We do have some upside. I do still believe in that he can develop, and then, pray that Evan Neal turns the lights on at some point. And we might.
Let me give you a name for a swing tackle.
Okay.
And you might, I don't know if you mentioned, I missed him, but a guy like Cam Fleming, he's a free agent. I think at his age, about 31, going into 32, he wouldn't cost much, a couple of $1 million. I mean, I think a guy who has been a higher level tackle in the past, who can play in different schemes, is a very good pass protector. He's not a very good run blocker, but
Right.
I mean but I get what I mean. You're talking about a swing tackle, so you're going to get what you get.
Yeah.
How about
I mean, and specifically, right tackle. I think he would be a strong option. I'll tell you a couple of guys. Let's put it the other way. A couple of guys that I'm not interested in. I'm not interested in Chuks Okorafor, who had some starting. I'm not interested in Andrus Peat. How about? I'm going to put a name out there. What do you guys think about Jonah Williams?
Yeah, we talked about Jonah Williams. Now he's interesting because he's just a tackle.
Tackle only.
He's not gonna. I don't think he's gonna be very cheap. I think he's gonna cost he's gonna cost about as much as Onwenu, I think.
So that's what I'm saying. We'll know how the Giants feel about Neal. Because he would be a good fit schematically for the team, and he's a good pass protector. He has a little bit of work to do in the run game, but he's a good pass protector. And if I don't think Joe Shane should be beholden to Evan Neal at right tackle anymore. I don't, and it's tough to say. It's tough to say. You want to hope that, but that's something. And Jay Ferry says he doesn't want to play right tackle at all. How would this work? You just throw some money at him, I guess. But we'll see. There are a couple other tackles that are, Josh Jones from Houston, who had some playing time this year. But nothing, tackle is not as not as heavy as guard. Trent Brown is another one.
Yeah, I was about to say, I'll throw a name at you, and I was going to say Trent Brown. And obviously in that situation, you're giving up on Evan Neal at tackle. You're saying this guy's a guard, we're moving him in because you're not bringing in Trent Brown to be on the bench. But, on PFF, I mean, we'll see how accurate they are. But they only have him at 2 years, $7.5 million. He's not even 31 yet. It's old, but for offensive line, that's not the oldest. I think you could clearly get 2 years of good play on that. He's played right tackle for most of his career. He's been left tackle recently, and most of his career was spent at right tackle. He has a history with Carmen Brasillo. If you decide that we're done here, this experiment's over, and Neal's going to guard, I wouldn't have an issue bringing in Trent Brown and then a guard.
And it's one of those things where all we would need is 2-3 years of adequate play, right?
Correct.
I want to do everything that we can. If we're bringing in a young quarterback, be it, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, whoever they decide, right? You want to those first few years are formative, right? And you
Yeah.
want, I mean, it's just you look at Dak Prescott and just how much having such a great offensive line, great weapons, Zeke Elliott there allowed him to develop. I strongly believe that I think that is what allowed him to be the player he is today. If he was on another team, I don't think he'd be a 40 million a year quarterback. And so I think when you can give these things, right? Look at the way that the Chargers helped out Justin Herbert the first few years of his career. Then they fell off with the offensive line, and then and now he struggled a little bit because of that this past year. But the first few years of Justin Herbert's career, their offensive line was good. They had Keenan Allen, Mike Williams. You know, they took care of him, and so it's going to be really, really important to do whatever we can, even if it's a stopgap, just
We
to
are-
help that quarterback develop.
I've heard from a few little birdies this week that this, you know, we've heard this is going into the weeds of like what's going on at 1925, but the words I've heard are there, like the term I've heard is there's an active civil war going on in that building between, let's just say, the Joe Schoen camp and the other side being the Chris Mara camp. You know, in terms of how they want to proceed forward. And I think, you know, this goes into the big discussion, which is, do you take a quarterback and do you take one early? And I think all the signs are indicating that Joe Schoen is definitely in the I got to get my quarterback now in this strong class early. But the offensive line is an issue. And I feel like, and this is reasonable. This is what we've heard, that from the Mara side of the camp, I think what I've heard is they're saying they're not necessarily thrilled with the idea, but they're saying, look, the offensive line kind of wrecked the end of Eli's career. It completely, say what you want about Daniel Jones. I'm not a big fan of him individually, but there's no doubting he played behind a horrific offensive line this whole time, which absolutely, you know, it took the knees out from underneath him because he needed more support than most and got less than everybody. And I think what their thought process is if you're going to take another quarterback, if you're going to put another kid into the system and invest in him, you better fix this damn line and fix it now. Which I'm all for. Like, invest in free agency, bring some veterans in. So I think the mentality, I believe, from what if these little, you know, rumors are true, that the nuanced compromise here is Joe Schoen has to go all in free agency to get veterans in here who can handle and stabilize this offensive line, so that he has the flexibility and freedom to go and take a young kid that he can develop. So I'm all for that.
Was it Chris Mara who had that one quote very early on in this process where he said, we're not looking at quarterback, and they said, well, like, what if you have an early pick? And then he said, oh, well, we'll get a very good player. So that kind of, I think it was that. I'll have to find, I'll try and tweet out that quote to you guys. I think it might have been Chris Mara, but it was basically.
You sure it wasn't Wes Steinberg?
No, it wasn't Wes Steinberg. It wasn't. No.
There is that NYG realist dude who posts like per ESPN radio, and then he does Chris Mara quotes all the time.
I think it might have been that. But listen, I think that it makes sense, right? If you're the owners, forget all your individual opinion of these people. If you're the owners, you're investing money in this organization.
Absolutely.
Like you're like, I'm going to go down the road of another quarterback without fixing this O-line. You better fix this O-line. And this is where like the warring Giants Twitter camps go, you know, this battle like O-line, quarterback, O-line, quarterback. And the actual answer is like, no, you got to fix them both.
Let's do both.
Right. And so I'm pro, listen, the draft is a crapshoot. You heard Joe Schoen talk about it this week where he said it's so hard to project out offensive linemen in college where there are so few of them blocking against pro-style offenses. Then you bring them to the NFL with limited training camp, limited practice time, limited preseason work, and you said, get out there and block, you know, against NFL linemen. It's a tall task. And he's like, you're very dependent on coaching. And the way I interpreted that was, you need to draft, but you cannot count on the guys you draft starting. You have to sit them down or let them earn their way onto the starting staff. You need to invest right away in talent. And this happens to be, again, a talented O-line group in free agency. Just spend your money there. Yeah.
I think that is a completely reasonable, take to have. And Momo was saying that quote was fake. Well, then maybe I got. My bad.
It happens.
That's okay.
But-
I've been got here before, and Monty usually he like rats me out in the middle of the pond.
You got raw nuts.
I got
Yeah,
Raynuts once.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ryan,
Yeah.
But it's sad that wouldn't surprise me as something that
Oh,
they
no.
they
No,
might say.
that's the sad part.
And so I completely believe that those whispers that of what's going on. I completely believe that. Obviously, when we think about a franchise quarterback, we think about a player that can transcend a lot of these issues. And so for me, I would want a quarterback if they believe that quarterback can transcend some of these issues. Eli Manning is just the best example when you look at what he
2011.
went through in 2011.
Yeah.
That was transcendent play, especially in the playoffs, right? And when you have David Boss as your center and David Deal as your left tackle, the corpse of David Deal, I should say, he was a very good player before that, and still, play the way Eli did. That's what I think about.
The 32nd ranked by PFF standards, the 32nd ranked offensive line in the NFL, the worst offensive line in the NFL. Eli threw for 4,900 yards, 29 touchdowns, and went on that Super Bowl run. Should have won the MVP that year based on that. And that's all about pre-snap reads, quick processing post-snap, getting the ball out quickly.
And that's Nate. You either have it or you don't.
Yeah, and you can't exactly. And I'm in the camp of like there are guys who can do it, and there are guys who can't. There are guys who can develop it. I mean, there's a lot of neurocognitive research I'm sure you're familiar with that suggests that the brain can develop, the kinds of rapid fire learning that that you use for post snap processing until about the age of about 24, maybe 25 latest, right? Like most of it kind of slows down into your early 20s. So this is part of the whole thing about taking younger players over older players when you're worried about a cognitive aspect of the game, that if you have a guy who's struggling with the cerebral aspects of the game and post snap processing and they're 24 years old, it's probably not going to get better in my opinion,
Yeah.
Exactly. But when you have a 20-year-old who's already showing signs of doing that and rapidly improving, throwing with anticipation and reading leverage and things like that, your trajectory is much higher. That's a little clue for what everybody knows I love about this quarterback class. So I'm all about the younger players and that stuff, but that does help with your offensive line. Of course, I'm talking about McCarthy. When I talk about that, he's learned to throw with much better anticipation this year. And he just turned 21. And everybody thinks the guy played behind a brick wall of an offensive line. He didn't. His tackle play was pretty bad in Michigan. He was under pressure a lot. Some guys can just get the ball out and produce and can see the field quickly and process, and some guys can't. So that does help. But going back to the offensive line part of it, like I'm kind of with Mara on this. Fix it. Like use your money, get veterans in here, stabilize it, draft for depth, right? Draft for depth to develop guys behind them later. But just trust the free agents at this point that are out there.
It's a little, scary given just how many resources we've poured into this. And so asset allocation, you're right. I mean, we have nothing to show for that, right? We've poured in the number 4 overall pick, the number 7 overall pick, a second round pick. Glowinski was our biggest free agent signing that year. And a third round pick, along with a couple others. And you can go back to the Jerry Reese days where he spent a first round pick on Justin Pugh, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a lot of, can't forget Nate Solder, highest paid tackle in NFL history at that time. But and so
and Patrick Obama. What did he make it through? 8 games? I know it's traumatic.
That was a memory that you've brought up that I'm not going to sleep well tonight.
It's okay. You have to feel your pain to learn from it. Just live in
That's
it daily.
true.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. There's a lot of pain to have learned from. So, hopefully we don't fuck it up this year.
And for me, with the offensive line, I think obviously we messed up on Solder, and Solder's worked out terribly.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of our issues, we refuse to invest the top of this offensive line market, with the exception of that Nate
Right.
Solder. We try to bargain bin when we're a team that doesn't have an identity in the offensive line. I think if you brought in like a guy like Michael Wenwu, and I don't know if Evan Neal will be able to stick a right tackle, but let's talk in a world that he is able to stick out there. You know how much better this line would be with Michael Wenwu sitting at right guard, being able to help John Michael Smith on his left, being able to help Evan Neal on his right, and having another veteran on that side of the line it makes everybody around you better. It's not just like you added one piece and that one piece is going to make the line better on its own. He makes the people around him better, which is a huge thing that
I agree.
we're making that big sign out.
I agree. I completely agree. It's a force multiplier, and it never hurts. I mean, you have Andrew Thomas, but he's more of the strong, silent type. It never hurts to have more of a mentor type offensive lineman that has some experience in the league and has played at a high level to help mentor these guys and make them play better. I completely agree.
Yeah. So if we look at it, what we've done here, we're looking at this offensive line. We're gonna, in an ideal world, I think we're all saying, all three of us, Michael Wenwu is like our top target. He's the top of our list. If we can get him, he's the perfect fit in so many ways for the Giants. There's a few guys we mentioned as cheaper offensive line guys. We want to bring in some guys, some versatility, bring some guys that are cheaper who can, help them out. And then for edge, where would that sit? Do you guys think we would still be good going out there and spending on a Bryce Huff, or would you think we'd be better off going down those next tier guys, the Van Ginkel, the Uches, guys along those lines?
I would sign the Huff. Personally, you still have a couple of years where you have to pay Kayvon Thibodeaux. And I think you can structure the deal in such a way where you don't necessarily take on the hit this year, you take more on next year. But you have year 3 of Kayvon next year, you have year 4 of Kayvon after that, and then you got the 5th-year option. All right, so you're years away before you have to really pay him. So I'm fine with paying Huff for a high quality edge rusher. Pittsburgh does it, right? They pay different edge rushers to keep that pass rush strong. So I'm fine with that. I don't know about you, KS. How do you feel about this?
Yeah, I mean, I think that if, with the understanding that you're going to have to significantly backload this deal, whatever it is you do, you could give him. The Giants have the ability to outbid whoever they want for a couple of players. I mean, we talk about cap space, but you just have to understand there's consequences down the line, and I think that I'm with you. I'm with you, Sal. I think I would probably do the same thing. Also, again, with the knowledge that if we probably shouldn't be done with just adding Bryce Huff, we probably need to add some depth alongside, there, because then you basically have Aziz, Kayvon, and Huff, which is
right.
And maybe Isaiah Simmons might be your 4th guy if you decide to sign Isaiah Simmons, but I think you have to add something. Maybe another reclamation project like Kayvon Chason or somebody like that with a little bit of upside could be an option. But
this is where I feel like we're going to get roster fillers, right? Like I think you add the quality guys, and then you're just gonna have to accept the fact that behind these guys, there's not much. You're going to get the vetmen guys, and you just have to draft and develop, and it takes a couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, I've stared at our draft board 1,000 times, as I'm sure you have, and looking at the first day of the combine and how things are shaking out. There are guys who I think will probably be there at 39 because of how strong the first round is at so many positions. that would normally go at the back end of round one. And I feel like we're going to get somebody fall to us that's going to be a strong edge rusher. And if we have fixed the offensive line, at least on paper, if we've addressed it aggressively in free agency, and let's say you just use pick 6 on a quarterback without having to trade any assets, I think you're going to have access to some pretty good edge rushers that you could add as depth right there, or a pass rushing defensive lineman, you know?
Absolutely. This is such a strong offensive draft at the top. That there will be some very, very good defenders that will drop into the second round. And you're absolutely right when it comes to edge, or even defensive line.
Well, let me give you a name. So I got so excited when I saw this today. Braylon Trice weighed in at 245 pounds. Did you see this?
I did.
Yeah, which I was so happy about, because Monty's like 245 and he's worried. I'm like, no, don't worry. I was like, that's who we need. We want a lunatic with his hair on fire who's a bull rusher. The dude had 70 pressures this year. He plays with with a crazy motor. He is Samoan. If you're worried about a Samoan being too light, you have the wrong problem on your mind. He will put that weight right. Don't worry about his weight. He'll get that right back up to 260 before the season.
I think he'll play at 260.
He dropped weight to run his 40 and to do his combine workouts.
There was a quote, and this is not a fake quote this time. This was a real quote, but it was something along the lines of, there are scouts everywhere that are hoping that their favorite players run shitty ass 40s.
Of course.
Horrible weigh-ins. Because you know what you're looking at. You know what you're looking at when you watch these players play in college, and which is why as the years have gone by, I've put less and less stock in the combine. You saw that video of the Rams drafting Puka, where they said, he ran slow. They literally said he ran slow, but then you put him on in college, and he's per miles per hour. He's running faster than most, and so there are so many good, defensive line prospects in that 30 to 40 range that I think we'll have access to.
I'll give you another name who's going to be a little later, who ran a good 40 today. Marshawn Nealand. Same prototype, right? Out of Western Michigan. Same prototype. I think he's about 265, 270 at about 6'5". Very, similar to the Darius Robinson, Braylon Trice, edge rusher, really more of like a defensive end who's like a bull rusher, a hot motor, ran a fast 40. Like, these guys will be there. And so when you talk about depth, you need 3 to 4 down linemen who can rush the passer. That's the depth I'm looking for, right? I think you can get those guys. So I'm all for just signing one guy, one impact player like a Huff or a Grenard, and just letting the draft play out,
Yeah, I'll say I'm fine with getting a Huff. If we can get him at the right price, I'm here for it. But I would say I'm also okay with going at an Uche, and if that's gonna leave a world where we don't have to touch another restructure and something in the season, I would prefer to not push as much money. If you can get a difference maker that you love, then you make it happen. But you don't do it just to do it either. Like there's plenty of depth in this edge class that I'm okay going after a Van Ginkel, going after an Uche, and there's guys who have a lot of upside there too. So I'll mention that as well.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely, you have to know your team and you have to know where you're at, right? You can't make the same mistake that we made this past offseason, where we thought we had something and we didn't, and we paid Daniel Jones $40 million a year.
Here's a fun story. That period in time is how Monty and I really became friends, going through that process, because he was trying to calm me down on DM. And I was like, they're going to fuck this up. They're going to fuck this up. They're going to pay him. And he was like, they can just transition tag him. They're going to just transition tag him. And I was like, no, they're going to fuck it up. He's going to be a disaster. And every day Monty's like, I'll say this, his tagline, I'll say this. If they see something in Daniel Jones, maybe we should trust it. And I was like, no, just walk away. And I remember as the deadline approached, that's when we started using the "Don't Give Me Hope" Avengers meme when the clock was ticking. Oh my God! I think that's when we became friends, and we were both so disgusted when the deal came out. and sad. And then we were hopeful. Right? We're like, all right, now he's been paid. Now it's all about expectations, right? Now there's no more excuses. You got to produce at a certain level of expectation as the $40 million man, and we set our goals and our expectations for the team accordingly. I think I had him passing for hopefully around 3,600 yards or something, and rushing for another 500, and giving us maybe 23 touchdowns in the air, something like that. I remember I asked Kay Adams this when I was on the Revival Guys show, and she looked at me when I said 23 touchdowns, and she was like, she gave me this look. She was like, 23. 23 is a lot, and I was like, 23 is a lot, and she was right. It was just, it ended up so much worse than even any of the most skeptical people could have imagined. But
a lot of copium. I had a lot of copium when that happened. Hopium turning into copium.
Yeah,
and then just despair.
But this is why we're talking about this now, right? Which is, let's not make I don't forget the mistake of signing him. How about the mistake of how the entire Daniel Jones era was handled from a roster construction standpoint? Let's give him the benefit of the doubt. The Giants did not do a very good job of putting a team around him. I mean, I think that's a very fair thing to say. Offensive line was atrocious. They took shots at wide receiver. They just didn't work out. And the defense was really just poorly invested in. Like, there was no concise plan for building a defensive identity where they invested their money. It was it was Gettleman. It was all over the place. I don't want to make those mistakes again. I want them to have like a clear plan, a clear 5-year plan for how to put this team together around the next quarterback. So that's kind of where I am. But we're coming up on, we're at 2 hours, as per usual. That's what we do here.
Yeah.
But KSI, I appreciate your time. Do you have any closing thoughts for our show here today?
Don't fuck it up.
Words of wisdom. Words of wisdom. Monty, you have any closing thoughts?
I just want to give like one last thing before we get out of here. I have like a list. I just want to give you guys some bottom tier, like potential vet min guys to just go that we have relations to. So I'm just going to run through it real quick. Just guys, keep an eye on. So quarterback, you can maybe look at like a AJ McCarron. We talked about like a Devin Singletary, Zach Moss. I mean, maybe not vet min, but low cost guys. You could also throw a Latavius Murray in there. That's a good like veteran guy, cheap, good pass protector. Wide receiver, you look at like a Quez Watkins, Mac Hollins, Isaiah McKenzie, cheaper guys, like a Blake Bell at tight end. We talked O-line. We don't really need to rehash that. D-line, you got like Marlon Davidson, Russ Blacklock. We talked edge a good bit. Linebacker, you got like Tyler Makovich from Buffalo. We talked corner a good bit. We mentioned some referee Button, Kristen Fulton might be good targets on the cheap. And then, you can look at like maybe Jalen Mills is a guy potentially be a connection at safety. Just some names throughout so we kind of touch on each one, because obviously if we spend money in those other spots, those are some like hopefully cheaper names that we might be able to bring in, who all those guys have connections, either front office people or coaches on the current roster. So just want to throw a few.
And Monty, what's going to happen, right? In the last hour and a half, we mentioned about 100 names, and the Giants are going to sign like 5 guys that we just didn't talk about at all.
Of course they will, and they're going to draft. they're going to draft 6 guys that we're all going to be like, "What the fuck?" I know. Well, I'm going to hold out hope until he yanks it from me again on draft weekend. But no, those are good names. All right. Let's close it out. We appreciate you for coming. Thank you, Mason. So, folks, follow Mason at NYG Mason. And thank you so much, KSI. We didn't give you the shout out you deserve in the beginning. So folks, follow KSI. It's at KSIXI, at KSIXI on Twitter. And he's awesome. He puts together a lot of great stuff in terms of roster building, draft stuff. We hope to have you back for our big board episode, which I think we talked about. So for those people who've asked us about putting together a big board, we are going to put together a big board. And we're going to, in some way, shape, or form, present it to you guys, somewhere right before the draft with KSI. And we'll go through that. Other than that, it's Combine week. Enjoy the combines. Tonight is D-line and linebacker. I think tomorrow is what is it? Is it quarterbacks tomorrow?
No, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs are on Saturday. Tomorrow's
It's-
D-backs, I think. Tomorrow's
Okay.
D-backs, I believe.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, follow the drills. For those who are interested, last week's episode, we went through all the drills that matter, position by position group.
Yep.
Which I think is useful to see which drills predict the most success by position group. So pay attention to that stuff. And other than that, I think we're going to close it out. Thank you guys for following us on the live YouTube. You can follow me at Queens_guy. Follow Monty at Montecristo at MONTECRI5TO. And you can follow us at He's a Giant Pod. Other than that, thank you guys. Have a very good night. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the combine. Go Giants.
Go
Go
Giants.
Giants.